Funding for Off 90 is provided in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.
Cruising your way on this episode of Off 90. We visit a museum for broadcasting. We learn about a novel based on the experiences of the writer's father during World War II. And we take a break at a unique burger stand in Austin. It's all just ahead, Off 90. Hi, I'm Barbara Keith. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Off 90. Mel Dickie started teaching a course about making custom fishing rods not long after he retired nearly 3 decades ago. Then he turned his custom fishing rod hobby into a business. We talked with Mel, who is 96, about his occupation.
I'm Mel Dickie. I build custom fishing rods of all types, spinning, bait casting, fly rods, right here at Wild Goose Sports. Well, I'm just putting the guide into position on this rod. After I retired, I started building rods just for friends, and it grew to where I build for a lot of people. This is just the way that the guide stays on the rod permanently, unless somebody bumps it and knocks it off, and then we put a new one on for them. I'm building right now a rod with American flags on it. It's going to a group of veterans. It's a fundraiser for them. Well, I went to college to be a math teacher and math and science major at Mankato. Upon graduation, we had a little flare-up with Japan wanting to take over Hawaii. And shortly after, I enlisted in the Air Force, and I never got back to teaching. I was a fighter pilot, single-engine fighter pilot, but in that I had a graduate teaching license, they made me an instructor. And I wound up instructing others to find their way home. Well, we use colored materials so that people can have the color they want. We use mostly wood handles because they give you more sensitivity and more lasting and look nicer. And you feel the fish that you probably have not felt before. Oh, I'm not very fussy. I like to catch walleyes. I fish panfish. I like to fish trout. Bass fishing, I guess, would be my favorite. This one happens to be a fish pattern in gold with brown around it. Oh, I enjoy building them. I enjoy making the customer happy, and I enjoy teaching other people to build their own. This first one you're looking at is an 8-point star in gold surrounded with gray. Well, I'm a licensed teacher, so I substituted mostly in the math and science field, although I don't do as much of that anymore as I did. This one happens to be a pattern that I like, in 2 shades of blue and also black and red. It's a chevron, and they all are separated with the gold in between them. And that's a red cedar handle. I'd always fished all my life, and after I built a few rods, some of them asked me to teach them how to use them, so I wound up guiding fishing trips. Wherever groups wanted to go fishing, I would be glad to take them. I enjoy it because I meet a lot of people and can satisfy them with the rod that they like. I'll be 97 my next birthday. I hope to do some more for many years.
Minnesota has a rich history in broadcasting. The Pavek Museum of Broadcasting in St. Louis Park presents and preserves that history. The museum strives to show how pioneers in electronic communications created an enormous impact on our society. We took a tour of the Pavek Museum of Broadcasting to learn more.
The Pavek Museum is more than just broadcasting. On the outside it looks quite small, it looks like an old warehouse, and then you come in and there's this giant room, and it has thousands of objects that really represent the broadcasting history of America. It's a very funky retro, kind of has its own personality to it. We have radios, TVs, TV shows people watched as kids, musical instruments. We have a ham radio studio, which is functioning for any ham amateur enthusiasts. Basically anything that's so specific to radios, TVs, broadcasting, we have.
The Pavek Museum began with Joe Pavek and his passion for old radios. Joe was actually teaching at Dunwoody, and the students were tearing apart old radios to learn how to fix them. And it bothered him to see these beautiful radios torn apart. He took one home. Well, the next thing you know, he was a radio collector. When he started his business, he covered a 5-state area wholesaling nuts and bolts, and it gave him something to do after he'd called on his 1 or 2 customers in a small town. He would hit the antique stores, he would hit the trade schools, and at that point the collection got out of hand. Earl Bakken was the inventor of the implantable pacemaker and the founder of Medtronic. Earl had put himself through college fixing old radios, televisions. He knew about the Pavek collection, he'd visited it. When Joe decided to auction the collection off, Earl did everything in his power to keep it here in Minnesota. So Earl got together with the Minnesota Broadcasters Association, and they formed the nonprofit umbrella for the museum. Jack Mullen was Bing Crosby's audio engineer. When he retired, he had put this big collection together that documents the history of recorded sound. Jack started looking for a museum that could purchase it, and Earl purchased the Mullen collection for this museum. We have one of the 2 machines that was used to record the 47-48 season of Bing Crosby show. And it really is the first tape recorder used in the entertainment industry in the Western world. Once we got the museum established, Earl came to us and he said, "You've got to do something with these radios. It's not enough just to have them preserved and have people looking at them. We need educational programs for children."
The Broadcast Workshop is our most popular workshop. It started in 1991. We give them a brief presentation of electricity and electronic communication, and then afterwards the kids get to go do a radio show in our 1960s radio studio. And then after that, they go do a game show where they get to be asked questions about what they learned at the presentation at the beginning. Their radio shows do broadcast within 2-block radius, so not very much, but they still get really excited about it. So it kind of gets them interested about, why we have electricity, where we get, the internet or our telephones, or how this all came about.
They're becoming part of it, and hopefully we're creating memories for them. We can read about this stuff, but until you actually get near enough to touch it and feel it and hear it and see it, they just don't know what it is.
To have tours in with seniors and elderly people, they can add their stories and their memories. Let you know that their grandpa had that, or that this was the first thing that they listened to a certain commercial on.
I saw a lot of things here that I totally forgotten about over the years. The floor model shortwave and AM radios reminds me back of my grandmother. I sit in the easy chair in her living room, looking at that big green eye in the middle, listening to our favorite radio shows, Amos and Andy, Spike Jones and the City Slickers, all those old shows we sit and listen to.
For the most part, people are a little ambivalent, and then they start to see things that they can relate to, and they start to realize that we care about their experience as much as we care about the stuff. And then they really start to have fun.
They brought out this replica of the Edison cylinder. Then we went to a real cylinder, and I've seen him, but I've never heard him, and he played a cylinder. I thought that was fantastic. That's something you don't normally see, and that's history.
Mike Ekkers is a historical enthusiast. He attends historical reenactments, gives talks about historical events, and writes historical fiction. Mike has written a book called Colors in the Air. The characters in his book are based on members of his own family. Experience what it was like for one family to live through World War II, from both the home front and from behind enemy lines.
You're right on time.
I'm Mike Ekkers. I'm an author, and I've written a book called Colors in the Air. Every war has two fronts. You have the home front, what people are doing here, and how they're coping with the war. And then you've got where the action is, so to speak. But having two fronts and writing a book about that brings home the togetherness of a couple, like my mom and dad, both doing their part for the war and what those different parts were. The one thing they had in common is that both of them just wanted to do what they could to get together again as soon as possible. So my father was a bombardier. His job was to destroy the Luftwaffe and the manufacturing capability of Germany. My mom here at home, her job was to help guide RAF officers around to factories here in the States so that they could share technology and also advance the end of the war. When the real hero of the story, Dale Weldon, the bombardier, he gets shot down later in the war in September of '44. And when he's shot down and hits the ground, he's captured by a farmer and the farmer's son and is brought into town. There's a group of civilians in the town who are going to string him up, along with the co-pilot, who they also captured at about the same time. Had it not been for a German Luftwaffe sergeant who was home on leave, who happened to come out of a bar and took control of the situation and forced the townspeople at gunpoint to turn over the two American flyers, they were going to hang them. And I'm glad they didn't, because I was born 10 years later. So I have a personal investment there. So many of the white men, so to speak, were joining the armed services, going overseas, upwards of 6 million of them during the war, that we had to fill the gap. And so my mother, in the book, became a person, an investigator, who would go out and not only encourage factory owners to hire minorities, she would help in the hiring process, and she would determine whether or not they were in compliance with the law. If they were refusing to hire minorities, there were stiff penalties at that time. Most people are familiar with Rosie the Riveter, and it went way beyond that. There was a lot of animosity at the beginning, a lot of dragging of the feet by factory owners. Having a woman even in a pair of baggy coveralls on the workroom floor in what had been an all-male environment was viewed as disruptive and affected productivity. It didn't take long for factory owners to find out that the women, in some cases, were far more productive. There were certain jobs where women were better suited for them. In the aircraft industry, women being a little bit smaller in stature could more easily get inside the wings to do things like mounting fuel tanks inside wings and riveting certain places and running wire through bulkheads in aircraft and ships. They could get into the smaller spaces. So I think that the contributions made by women during the war were amazing. We couldn't have won the war without them. For being a prisoner of war, just the waiting itself was horrible. You did anything you could to keep busy or you went stir crazy, and that's why there's an expression for that. My father used to say that the hardest thing that ever happened in his life was being 21 years old, doing exactly what he knew was the right thing to do and being held in prison for doing it. He said it was awful. And the waiting, there was nothing for these prisoners to do. They didn't work. They had to spend their time filling in their time however they could. And that's why eventually the camps became organized enough with the Allied prisoners to where my father earned the equivalent of a bachelor's degree while he was in prison camp in 9 months because he was studying every day and received a lot of college credit from the University of Minnesota when he returned. My mom remembers VE Day. She went to church, which most Americans did that day, go to church and pray. She didn't party because her war wasn't over yet. Her husband, my father, wasn't home yet. When the ship that my father came back on arrived in Boston, my dad literally walked up to my mom. She didn't recognize him because he had lost about 40 pounds and just looked different. Once she knew who it was, she was happy to have him home. I'm a firm believer in the adage that heroes are just ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And we call them America's greatest generation. These guys will say that they didn't do anything special. They'll say things like, oh, all I did was guard a beach in California or something, and then you find out later that he won a Bronze Star on Saipan or whatever. They're not out for the glory, they're not out for the recognition. But what will make a tear pop into their eye is when you just come up and quietly thank them and shake their hand and just say thanks for your service.
The Tendermaid Sandwich Shop has been an Austin institution for almost 80 years. It was built on what was once the busiest intersection in town. Known for both its hamburgers and the friendly atmosphere, the Tendermaid has attracted generations of customers. Join us as we enjoy a burger and a shake at the Tendermaid.
We still do it the 1938 way. We take the stick matches, light the match, and there's a special way to hold it in your fingers, and you just start lighting each burner. There's 3 burners, and we just turn them on and move your hand back and forth there. You know, I think there's something about walking through these doors. It's kind of like going back in time, you know. The Tendermaid is a loose meat sandwich shop, and we specialize in loose meat burger and homemade hand-packed malts and shakes. So now we're going to cut open these tubes of meat. These are 10-pound tubes of 8614 certified ground chuck. Pretty top-of-the-line burger here for our Tendermaid customers. In 1938, Jerry and Mildred Thatcher came from Iowa to Austin, Minnesota to start a business. They knew that they wanted to have a loose meat business. So this was the busiest intersection in Austin at the time. He started building the building and it became the Tendermaid sandwich shop. And then we take this fish flipper and chop our meat. But you build lots of upper body strength to working at the Tendermaid. Hi guys! It's built on a slant, so it just keeps kind of steaming and draining in there. So as the day goes on, we just keep moving it up, putting more in, cooking it, and it's just kind of this cycle. So it's fresh all day long, every day. It's actually our cooker that seasons the meat. So it's just one of the best ways to eat beef. It's very simple, but simple is great. When we're getting ready in the morning, we scoop just a bazillion malt cups with the ice cream, and then to several of them we're going to add milk too, so that when people come in we can be a lot quicker. Mix these up. And the hard pack is just the way to go. There's just nothing like your old-fashioned hand-scooped ice cream to make a delicious, perfect malt. The most popular lunch is a cheeseburger with everything and a chocolate malt. So I'm making a bacon cheeseburger with everything on it for Matt. So that's ketchup, mustard, pickle, onion, bacon, and he chose American cheese. Take the cheese, we put it in the meat so it gets nice and melty, and there would be Matt's burger. Steaming, yummy deliciousness. And of course, he gets the spoon so that he can catch every last little crumb that falls on his paper. You know, some people will look at it like, wow, this is really weird. I have a hamburger and then they gave me a spoon. So we usually try to get right on that and explain what it's for. You can spot somebody from Austin because they just dig right in. They know how to unwrap it. They know how to kind of keep it a little more together. A lot of them have their little technique where you maybe push it down a little bit so that things stay together a little bit more, and no problem finishing it with that spoon. So we're here to make things to specification. And do you want a malt too? So say somebody wants it a little drier off the top. So people will come in and say, I want one off the top. Or maybe they want one from this end that everything drains down into. We have several people that like a lot of liquid on their burger. I think people want local because not just food-wise, it's customer service-wise. You come into our little Tendermaid here and we're so happy to see you. We embrace our customers. Every person matters. We hear current events all day, every day. We hear the weather, we hear the political scene. We've got, you know, maybe the fire that happened. People will walk in and there might be a relative in here that they haven't seen forever. You know, it's that kind of place. Travelers are looking more for a place that's unique to the area. They're kind of done with the fast food and the chain restaurants. They're looking for where the locals go. You know, we just recently were voted one of the 9 restaurants that you need to eat at in Minnesota before you die. So my husband Gary and I were high school sweethearts, and this has been his dream his whole life pretty much, to own the Tendermaid. It was kind of a joke between us. We'd go by in our early years and he'd point at the building, and his nickname is Whitey, and he'd say, that's gonna be Whitey's Tendermaid someday. And I'd just say, oh yeah, that'd be great, you know, not thinking it would maybe ever happen. But then, you know, later on, obviously, we got married and the opportunity presented itself, and the rest is history. We became Tendermaid owners. It's been a family affair. Our kids have worked here. It's just a very tight-knit team of people, and we're blessed to be here. It's just our privilege, really, to carry on this legacy of this place. You know, there aren't many places that are this old in Austin that are still running, any restaurants anyway. And, you know, it's a favorite of people that have grown up here and come back to town, and a lot of times this is the first place that they stop when they come into town. So It's just such a joy to see how excited they are that we're still here and that we're just carrying on this legacy, which it really is. You know, we haven't changed much over the years. It's the original cooker that Thatcher's fabricated, and that is the magic of the Tendermaid, obviously, is the cooker itself. To go. Oh, to go. We don't get to keep you. We see a lot of Spam Museum visitors, and we're looking forward to seeing even more now that they're in our backyard. I could throw a stone and hit it. So I can't wait to see all the people that will see us and see our little place here that has been here for 79 years, and this will help us carry on till we're, 100 and more, hopefully.
That's all for this episode. If you enjoy programs like Off 90, please show your support by becoming a member of KSMQ Public Television. Keep local programming vibrant in southern Minnesota. Give us a call at 507-481-2095 or 1-800-658-2539. or sign up online at ksmq.org. Thanks for watching. Join us next time, Off 90.
Funding for Off 90 is provided in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.